meeting to order. Just a reminder that the meeting will be recorded and available to view on the Council's website. And Christine could ask that we get IT colleagues to start the recording. Members, it's with absolute deep sadness that this is the first meeting that since we heard the sad news of the passing of our fellow Cabinet member and our friend, Councillor Maureen Mackay. I wanted, on behalf of the Cabinet, to pass on our condolences to Maureen's family, friends and fellow councillors, fellow Labour councillors as well. Just our deep our condolences very much felt in terms of the amount of years that Maureen's contributed to this Cabinet. Has been very much appreciated, and I think there'll be other announcements that will be made at the full council. But I thought it would be appropriate to mention that at today's Cabinet meeting. Could I pass you now to Christine and call for the session?
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. Councillor Douglas Reid.
Here.
Councillor Jim McMahon.
Yeah, Christine, thanks.
Councillor John McFadden. Nope. Councillor Elaine Cowan.
Here.
Councillor Ian Linton.
Here.
Councillor Graham Barton.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Barry Douglas.
Here, thanks.
Councillor Neil Ingram.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Claire Maitland. Here. I have an apology from Councillor Drew Filson. Dr David Lewis. See him on screen. Harriet Johnston.
Here, thanks.
I have an apology from Babs Mowat. Hazel Malacotty.
Yes, thanks, Christine.
And Jackie Livingston.
Yes, I'm here, thanks.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Christine. Next item's declaration of interest. I don't think there's anything significant, but if there are, could you please make them now? Oh, so we go on to the item 2A, which is the medium-term financial strategy 25-26 budget strategy report, and I'll pass you over to Joe McLaughlin. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. The report before you today is our budget strategy for 2025-26 for that revenue part of the budget as we walk towards budget setting in the end of February. The paper itself gives some idea of the scale of the challenge. The background section notes that based on previous reports and previous assumptions, we had an estimated budget gap next year of around £17 million. We've taken substantial steps to try and reduce that, and as we go through this report, I'll explain that work in more detail. Rightly, the report picks up the autumn statement that was produced and delivered by the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the end of October. That signalled a few things for us. It showed an increase in spending, but it also signalled a spending review that will take place in next March. And the spending review will essentially set out the spending plans for the new Westminster government for their term in office. So the spending review, a really important piece of work, and we wait that for next year. The paragraphs that follow then give an indication of the statistics around economic growth and also around inflation. And you'll remember, members, that inflation was bobbing around 2% and then increased, and then at one point in the past was supposed to go below the 2% and below zero at one point. The new information that we have, and based on that analysis, we can see that inflation itself is increased from 1.7 to 2.3. That increase predominantly due to energy costs will probably rise in the short term before perhaps falling back down to that 2%. That as well as borrowing costs will also increase in the short term too. So something that we keep an eye on as we get towards February, and that budget report, capital report, and also that treasury report that follows too. You'll have heard, members, about the increase to employers' national insurance, conveniently known as ENIC. This was two changes. It saw an increase in the employer's rate from 13.8% to 15%, and also a reduction in the threshold upon which employers will pay national insurance, that threshold reducing from £9,100 a year to £5,000 a year. The OBR, who analysed the UK government's budget, has estimated that will cost the public sector £5 billion. And in terms of more locally on a Scottish level, the Scottish Parliament Information Centre, SPICE, have produced an indication, a report, which would suggest that that increase would be disproportionately larger in Scotland because of the per capita head of the number of public sector employees employed in the public sector in Scotland. The government itself estimate that change in both the threshold and in the rate would see an additional £500 million added to public sector pay costs. And we await the decision in the budget this afternoon to find out more information about that. What we do know is that the consequential, that Barnett consequential that will flow from the UK government to Scottish government, £3.4 billion next year, will not include contribution for ENIC. That will be a separate adjustment that will be made at a later date. In terms of Scotland, it begins at paragraph 12 and it notes the budget that will take place this afternoon. The budget itself will be very high level. It will essentially be the Cabinet Secretary indicating how much resource allocation will be provided to the various elements of the Scottish public sector. For local government, we've got a further settlement and adjustment taking place next Thursday. So from today, we'll have a broad indication, but we won't have any detail at a local level until the detailed spreadsheets and the individual council settlements are produced next Thursday. We'll need a day or two to work through those spreadsheets, but we'll get that information to group leaders shortly thereafter. So what we do know as well, and a further update from the report, paragraph 14 talks about the final allocations being approved as part of the Scottish parliamentary process, indicating that will be confirmed in February or in March. I now have those dates. So stage 1 debate in the Scottish Parliament on the finance bill will be on the 4th of February. Stage 2 will be the 18th of February. And the final stage 3 debate will take place on the 25th of February, conveniently the day before members are asked to set our budget on the 26th and on the 27th. So it's a bit tight, members, but we're keeping an eye on those dates and on the information that we need to build that budget. In this budget strategy report, it's right that I indicate the challenges we've had this year in terms of overspends across the council, and that's picked up at paragraph 17 through to 20. I give assurance to members that the detailed work that's been taking place both by budget holders but also by myself and the Chief Exec in terms of holding line-by-line meetings with relevant budget holders to go through their budgets on a cost centre by cost centre basis has concluded last week, and that council-wide recovery plan is being compiled. We're going to have a balances review before that, so that the members will have options to consider. But certainly that council-wide recovery plan will be prepared this month for members to examine, challenge and scrutinise in January. And so, members, at paragraph 21, we begin to build the budget for next year and use the assumptions that we have undertaken to do that. In terms of grant funding, we estimate and we anticipate that we'll get a flat cash settlement from Scottish Government. In other words, we'll get for 25-26 the funding that we got for 2024-25. In terms of employee costs, well, inflation is guiding that greatly, members, and that inflation has been a bit erratic. It fell to 1.7% and then rose again to 2.3% and will rise further before falling back down. We're sitting in December. Those pay awards will take effect from April, but negotiations, as you know, last way beyond April. And so the assumption we have for pay is that we'll have something similar to this year, but be guided clearly by the conversations and the discussions that will take place as we go forward. In terms of national insurance for ourselves, those two changes, the change in both the percentage rate and the threshold, would mean for us then at 1st of April, our employee costs will have increased by £5.6 million. So we have a bit of a challenge here, members. We've got Scottish Government rightly saying that we estimate £500 million would be required to meet that debt, that liability. But at the same time, we understand the contribution that will be provided from UK Government based on the methodology of the English public sector pro rata then that will be less than £500 million. So again, interested to be with what we hear this afternoon and certainly next week too. But rest assured, members, that in terms of this substantial piece of work, we will continue to influence through COSLA and through the council leader himself. In terms of supplies and services and contract inflation, we've set an allocation by £1 million, but we recognise that's insufficient. But we rely on contract administrators, as we've done over the years, to negotiate and to ensure best price is achieved. In terms of the council's fees and charges that set locally out with council tax and rents and those set by government, we anticipate that fees and charges will increase by 3% next year. In terms of alternative delivery models, or IGB, we will follow the guidelines required by government, which is that IGBs will receive for next year the same allocation they received for this year, plus any new money that's provided by government, and that money will be additional and not substitutional, and we will align to that as we normally do. Ayrshire Roads Alliance will be in line with its business plan, and for the Ayrshire Leisure Trust, then we will continue with the methodology we've used in the past, but be guided by the report that you approved, members, in terms of that culture and leisure review. At paragraph 35, we touch on our borrowing costs, and very interested in this. You know, members, that we need to go and borrow. So the delay in that interest rate falling to an acceptable level where we would intervene the market and take some borrowing is something that we are acutely aware of and ready to go into the market when we can. We recognise that in terms of services this year, that demand pressures will be a challenge, and so we've set aside an allocation within the budget for demand pressures, and these will be spread probably on a pro rata basis, members. Members, that takes us to council tax. And I'm acutely aware that in terms of our Band D equivalents, East Ayrshire is the fourth highest Band D equivalent in Scotland. And there's a reason for that, and that's because over the years we've spent over £1 billion on capital assets. We have built new schools and repaired roads and the like. And that borrowing cost was linked to the council tax. I understand members' concerned about that indication around fourth expensive, and so taking steps over time to bring us back into the pack. Indications are this for next year that council tax levels are likely to be double digits in most places, and that's an indication of the pressures that local government is facing at this time, and you're acutely aware of that through the East Ayrshire performance reports that you receive and approve. In terms of our budget assumptions for next year, we have a low, medium and high impact budget sensitivity analysis, and based on the current assumptions, we would anticipate a council tax increase of 8% next year, albeit we're aware of the information that will be shared this afternoon, and more importantly, the information that will be shared in detail next Thursday to local government. And so that's an indication at this point in time, and we will adjust that as we go forward if needed. When all of that is taken into account, members, we have a budget gap next year not of £17 million, but of 8.750, so significantly less. And as you would imagine, the Deputy Head of Finance has sent out templates to services some weeks ago, asking them to allocate cuts to the value of the amount shown at table 45. And it's important that we spend maybe a minute or two on the table at paragraph 45, because once again, remember, the budget assumptions we have going forward recognises the importance you place on our strategic plan and on those 6 priorities contained within it, particularly for education and for learning. And whilst education has the largest budget in the council, the allocation of the 8.75 of cuts is minimised for education with only 2.09% relative share, whereas other services are at 4.86%. The same with the Health and Social Care Partnership. So those 2 important pieces of our council are protected with the budget that we will ask you to set in February. Community engagement will be important as we go forward, both in setting the mood music for the years ahead, but also in explaining in more detail why we need to make cuts of £8.7 million and also discuss the options that are brought forward by services. That engagement will take place with trade unions, with businesses, with the Parent Strategy Group and with the Young Persons Cabinet. And it will follow the same timelines as normal. If approved today, then that engagement would start tomorrow and would conclude in mid-January. Our reserve strategy is also there, and we note that we have an uncommitted balance, which is £10 million, and that's a healthy balance, particularly for the challenges we face. Housing rents, you agreed as part of the reports that were presented to you in the 20th of November. And Chair, that essentially is the budget strategy report. It's a complex piece of work. It begins the process where myself and the Deputy Head of Finance will meet with group leaders and groups as we walk through December, January and into February in budget setting. And I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Thanks very much, Joe. As I say, it's particularly a moving feast, and we know there will be announcements made in the weeks ahead as the bill goes through its various stages. One of the things I was just looking for a wee bit clarity myself, Joe, you mentioned about Enoch's national insurance contributions in paragraph 24, and it's estimated that we will be fully funded in terms of our exposure to the 5.6 million, but I know at COS there's been some discussion about contracted services, the third sector and the private sector, and how will that affect us. And just could you maybe, what's our kind of exposure there and where are the risks there?
Thank you, Chair. You're quite right. So when this was announced by UK government, they were quite clear that this was for public sector employees, and their definition of that is quite strict. So GPs, for example, will not be reimbursed or have any funding allocated for the national insurance for them or their teams. But more importantly, for local government, we recognise that the services we provide are predominantly internal, but that we also externalise and look for support from the third sector and the private sector. We accept that that will not be, those elements will not be reimbursed for this. And so where, for example, we've got care home contracts, care at home contracts that are externalised, then that organisation that currently provides that will see an increase in their pay bill in 1st of April. That can either result in less staff being employed to compensate for that. It can be less of a service delivered, or it can be a cost absorbed by the organisation, or ultimately a request back to local government to ask for more funding. We are very aware of that. As a council, and as the Chief Exec said on numerous occasions to you, we're an employing council. We employ local people, predominantly women here, and give them a fair wage and a pension. For those local councils that are more externalised, Chair, then this will be a significant problem. But for all of us in Scotland, all 32, I think the best example is the National Care Home contract, where we will begin to see pressures added to existing pressures in terms of that negotiation. But we're acutely aware of that. We're contacting colleagues in COSLA to see where those negotiations are, but we expect quite a dramatic, challenging discussion in terms of that contract itself. But it won't be reimbursed by ourselves or by the UK government.
Thanks, Joe. Colleagues, any other questions or comments? Ian.
Thanks, Dougie. I think you summed it up yourself there by saying it is a moving feast, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Joe for setting aside considerable time, not just coming to our group meeting, but attending all councillors, keeping us up to date with, fully informed with the figures as things progress. I find that personally very useful, and I think that's something that we should continue. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Ian. Anyone else? No. Just remains to be, as we're saying, these reports will be fairly regular right up to the budget day. Just again, thank Joe and his team for all the hard work they're putting in for us, and all the hours that they're putting in for us. It's much appreciated. Can we agree the recommendations? Okay, thanks for that. And we go now to the renewal of corporate insurances for the period 1st October to 1st October 24 to 30th September 25. Joe again, Joe McLaughlin. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Now I'll pass across to Caroline Mellon, who's our insurance manager, to present this report, if that's okay.
Thank you, Joe. Members, I appreciate it's unusual for a paper to come to you for noting. However, due to its importance, CMT agreed it should be brought before members. This report sets out the current position of the renewal of the Council's corporate insurance policies for the year 1st of October 2024 to September 2025. The Council has been insured with Zurich Municipal since 1999 for the main classes of insurance, property, liability and motor, along with a number of other required lines such as all risks, terrorism, money and computer. When covers were first placed with ZM, policy excesses were very low and have remained so. In part, this reflected market conditions at the time, but it was also indicative of insurers' assessment of the risk controls in place across the Council. The result of having such low excesses equates to an almost 100% transfer of insurable risk. We've managed to maintain this level of excess at subsequent renewals, whilst other councils have seen excesses increase, possibly as a trade-off for lower increases in premiums, much of which, no doubt, have been driven by worsening claims experience. There has, however, been a clear shift in attitude from ZM. It's been clear that property losses across all clients have increased, as have costs associated with claims such as labour, materials, etc., which represents a significant risk to them. Their changing attitude may also be linked to their own assessment of the ability of the public sector to maintain assets and proactively manage the many risks that a diverse portfolio represents. In addition, the cost of motor claims has increased, partly as a result of labour and parts, and as vehicles themselves become more expensive. This has all resulted in an increase of 1.348 million for 24-25 renewal terms at existing levels of cover and excess, with restrictions on cover indicated for unoccupied properties. This could see premiums more than double by financial year 2027 to 28. It was clear from renewal last year that one possible option was to start to increase our self-insured levels through accepting higher policy deductibles. Research shows that excess levels across other Scottish local authorities are at a much higher level. As a result, we've sought renewal terms based on a moderate increase in the property deductible to £5,000 per claim and for motor to £1,000 per claim. Tables 5 and 6 on page 7 give an indication of costs that had these excesses been in place in previous years, the average additional cost could have been absorbed or managed through existing resources. With regard to accounting for any additional costs, it's likely that the excess for most property claims will form part of the net capital cost of reinstatement and either increase the underlying borrowing or be written off in the year. The excess in motor claims will continue to be charged to the service responsible for the claim. Adopting these higher excesses would reduce the expected increase in premium to 0.697 million for the current year and 3.355 million by 31st of March 2028. Other key points to highlight are the need to take appropriate action to ensure the physical and human resources implications from the transfer of the Galleon Centre to East Ayrshire Leisure Trust. A review of insurance fund accounting requirements, which could see greater use of internal premium cost allocations based on overall performance. The possible need to undertake a full retender of all council, including East Ayrshire Leisure Trust and ARA insurances, and the appointment of specialist brokers to support this process. A review of future insurance arrangements for property and motor covers in particular, and the establishment of an insurance working group to support these processes. And finally, consideration of the implications for future claims handling arrangements and any immediate changes that result from a higher level of policy excess, such as increased internal processes. In summary, insurance is a significant cost to the Council. However, it still acts as a significant risk control measure, with the cost of substantial losses still transferred to insurers. It is, however, clear that the market appetite for public sector risk is limited. Notwithstanding the higher levels of excess noted in this report, it is likely that we will see further pressure from insurers to demonstrate robust controls are in place across all insurance classes and that these are being effectively managed. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thanks for that report. Just on the issue about the galleon, I'm just wondering, will there be a specific report about the galleon? Because I'm not wanting to get into it because we're in public session, but there's obviously risks associated with us taking over the insurance. Will there be a specific paper coming back to us or in some form? Joe?
So certainly, Chair, you're absolutely right. The Council and the Trust through Annika have a number of working groups that are laying down the preparations for the transfer. Part of that is the Finance and ICT working group, where we meet to discuss a whole range of issues, including this. So it'll be captured within that and brought forward in due course. The risks themselves will be managed if there are risks, but certainly we're moving from one insurer to another insurer, and we're still discussing whether that takes place fully or whether we retain some part of that out. We'll take advice from experts and come back at a later date, Chair.
Thanks. Anyone else? No? Okay, can we go back to the recommendations? Can we agree the recommendations? Thank you. That's great. And we'll go to item 4 now. That's the policy review schedule. Amanda Law. Amanda.
Thanks, Chair, and morning members. The purpose of this report is to recommend to Cabinet proposed changes of 2 employment policies and provide an update regarding the Disclosure Scotland policy. The background is detailed in paragraphs 3 through to 5 and describes the policy review schedule. Main report, starting in paragraph 7, is in relation to the Scottish Social Services Council policy, which has been reviewed to take account of the SSSC registration process and guidelines in maintaining registration update. These are summarised within the report, and noting that these include in section 3, the codes of practice have been updated with the SSSC in June 24. In section 4, the registration process has been changed, where a new employee had 6 months to gain registration. This has been decreased to 3 months. And note in section 7, the fitness to practice has been updated to include behaviours both inside and outside of the workplace. In section 8, social media has been updated to include information or views that could be perceived as discriminatory by employees. Paragraph 8 details the enhanced leave policy. Section 1 has been updated to reflect that term time employees now with the additional 1 day's leave from the pay award don't need to take all leave within the school holidays. Section 3 has been updated in the policy to allow employees to buy enhanced leave in individual days rather than full weeks. And section 6.5 has added some examples of calculations to reflect the current pay scales. And in Appendix 1, the form has been updated to take into account the changes to the policy. Paragraph 9, Disclosure Scotland policy. Disclosure Scotland themselves are undergoing a series of changes arising from the Disclosure Scotland Act 2020, which are scheduled to take place between 30 September 24 and the 1st of April 26 and will impact on their policy. So it is our intention to continue the review with the changes and postpone the policy update until the completion of these changes in 2026. The implications are detailed in paragraph 12, noting in paragraph 15 that the trade unions have been fully involved and have agreed to all the changes within the policies. And I'd refer you back to paragraph 2 for the recommendations, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for that report. Any questions there? Jim? Yeah.
Thanks, Dougie. Amanda, it's in paragraph 7 and in section 8, social media.
And it's been updated to include information used. Could you maybe give me some examples of stuff like that where employees might be aware or maybe should be aware of comments that could be discriminatory on social media?
So it's also within, obviously, the council's code of conduct, but this is in particular in relation to those employees who are registered with the SSSC. So the section has been expanded. They also have to adhere to the code of conduct for the SSSC. So it's been expanded to give those examples of where employees may think that they're on their private Facebook page or their Instagram page and they're making comments between friends only, that where it's not appropriate and it could be seen as discriminatory, and calling the council into disrepute.
So, anyone else? No, can we go for the recommendations? Paragraph 2, page 32. Can we agree recommendations? Okay. Now go to the apprenticeship framework, and Donna Nielsen for that. Donna.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is detailed in paragraph 1 to provide Cabinet with the details of the review of the Council's apprenticeship framework and how it provides a consistent and clear approach to employing and supporting apprentices during their early career journey. It also considers the Scottish Government Fair Work Pillar and the implications for the introduction of a standard starting rate of pay for all apprentices of the Scottish Real Living Wage rate. The recommendations are detailed in paragraph 2, and then the background is detailed in paragraphs 3 to 8, and first of all highlights the key priority of the Council's workforce strategy, which is to increase our younger workforce. And it also considers the last review of the apprenticeship programme with the focus on the rates of pay and the steps that have been taken since this moved into people and culture and became the Future Skills team in early 22 with the introduction of the Jobs and Training Fund. In terms of the main changes, these are covered by paragraphs 9 to 25. They include paragraphs 9 to 13, the pathways framework detailing the update in relation to career pathways, the different frameworks available on the Workforce and Future Skills intranet page, and how services can request an apprentice using a digital form. The future service needs and skills gaps are covered by paragraphs 14 to 16 and cover the considerations services should give to what their workforce will look like in the future, and details the support the Future Skills team can provide services in terms of considering modern apprenticeships to fill skills gaps. It also discusses other learning routes in paragraphs 17 to 18, and this includes pre-apprenticeships, foundation apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships, and how these can provide a bridge into a career or support career development. Apprenticeship support and development, paragraphs 19 to 20, covers the support provided by training officers, line managers, and the role of the buddy mentor within a service. And then in paragraphs 21 to 25, it covers our existing employment policies and a degree of flexibility that we've introduced into some of the policies. So this includes our recruitment and selection policy, our support and attendance at work policy, our disciplinary policy, and our positive recruitment policy. And full detail is covered within the apprenticeship framework. So paragraphs 26 to 36 of the report covers future considerations, and this is specifically around community wealth building, and highlights that the Council are currently meeting the requirements of Fair Work. And however, as part of that Fair Work criteria, and in order to receive Scottish Government grant funding, as a public body, we need to pay all employees at least the real living wage, including apprentices. And so at this point in time, we don't pay all of our apprentices the real living wage. So we have an exception in place, which takes us up to the 31st of March 2025. So Within the paragraphs 32 to 33, we've detailed what it would cost us, what it costs us currently for our existing cohort of apprentices. It's detailed as 3.186 million. However, if we were to change to the new real living wage rate, which is £12.60, this cost would increase to 3.529 million. So this in paragraph 34, it details then what that difference is, which would be 343,000 approximately, if we were moving all our existing modern apprentices to the real living wage. As well as cost implications of changing all apprentices to this rate, there are implications for our current pay and grading scale. Just now, we pay existing employees on our grade A scale just slightly above that at £12.96 per hour. So if we were to move all of our apprentices to the real living wage rate, there would only be 2% of a difference between those rates of pay. For employees who may have, a lifetime's worth of experience versus employees who are coming in to do training within the council. In terms of implications, these are covered for human resources at paragraphs 38 and 39, and confirms that the report has been shared with trade unions. In terms of equality and fairer Scotland duty, these are covered at paragraph 40 and advises that there is an equality impact assessment in place, which was done the last time the apprenticeship framework was developed. However, it has been further reviewed to take account of other protected characteristics impacted by the framework, particularly around the revisions to some of our employment policies. In relation to financial implications, these are covered in paragraphs 41 and 42 and kind of cover the fact that if we were to change our rate of pay for apprentices, this would be an additional cost of 343,000 based on our current cohort of apprentices. And then community wealth building implications are covered in paragraph 43. Details that with the council choosing to deliver a wide range of services internally, this offers direct employment to more local residents, with the criteria of the Jobs and Training Fund supporting apprenticeships being ring-fenced to East Ayrshire residents, subsequently bringing more income into local communities. And then a copy of the apprenticeship framework is attached as Appendix 1 and is from page 44 onwards in your reports. And then I would refer you back to recommendations in paragraph 2 and happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that. Very good report. It's quite heartening to see paragraph 42 that our apprenticeship and jobs training programme exceeded our expectations with 239 individuals getting successful jobs and training through that massive injection of funding. All hope we're able to continue this in some manner, but look to the future, because I think it's money. Money's a scarce commodity at the moment. It's nevertheless something worth committing our resources to in terms of our employment initiatives and our workforce programme. Members, do we have any comments? Or no? Well, in that case, we would maybe just go to the recommendations and agree them in paragraph 2. Thank you. Thanks for that. And on to item 6, which is the submission of the climate change public sector report for 23-24. I don't know, it's Andrew and James. I don't know who's leading it. Is it Andrew?
Yeah, I'll do the report. Thanks, Chair. Okay. Thank you, Chair. This is the annual climate change report that sets out the Council's activity to address climate change and carbon reduction. This is a statutory obligation to report and demonstrate actions to support national targets on climate change. Appendix 2 provides the actual submission based on the government's reporting format. The main report tries to bring that to life in relation to action areas and align it with the Council's climate change strategy and local priorities. Climate change remains a global threat and continues to be noted in the Council's risks register. The background of the report recognises this, although also sets out some key national changes around statutory targets. Since the Council set its climate change strategy and ambition, the national position has shifted and the expectation of further investment has been limited due to the wider economic environment. From the Council's perspective, we do continue to see overall good progress on reducing the Council's carbon footprint. However, the same level of progress will be extremely challenging over the next few years. The Council is also only 3 to 4% of the overall East Ayrshire carbon footprint, and therefore the challenge remains significant. Actions in the report have aimed to impact the wider community and not just the Council's carbon footprint. The report is set out in the 4 themes of the strategy, which remains the key areas of action. I won't go into the report in detail. Appreciate there's a significant amount of reports today, but just some highlights in terms of the 4 themes. I think overall gas and electricity usage continues to make gradual reductions, with around 15 to 18% reduction in consumption since 2018. The Local Heating Energy Efficiency Strategy report that's also on Cabinet today demonstrates the huge challenge of reducing our energy demand. However, it does show the Council's estate and housing are in a better place than the private ownership. Energy is the biggest area in the Council's remaining carbon footprint. Therefore, we continue to have some new investment in highly energy efficient design, but also need to focus on more practical reduction measures like LED replacement, and again, reducing our overall estate. The core project will continue to offer investment opportunity and innovation. Transport remains a challenge for investment in fleet, low carbon fuels and behaviour change. Active travel initiatives, EV charging concession contract and the fleet management system will continue to be the areas of focus to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, and this will be led by the Ayrshire Roads Alliance. The waste review has further embedded the direction of travel to promote reducing waste and recycling, with the transition from landfill to energy from waste being the biggest impact on our reporting figures. Procurement will also become more of a focus, both in reporting and in the impact on the use of resources. Natural environment, although at this stage not included in the carbon calculation for the authority, it remains a critical area to address climate change and biodiversity. The Local Development Plan 2 and a range of initiatives in the report continue to maximise environmental improvement with external funding and supporting the national policy framework. Communities, businesses, young people, members and officers have also been engaged with initial support to accelerate action, supporting access to external funding, for example with the EcoFlex system being available now. We've been able to support over £2 million worth of external investment through the energy companies to residents in East Ayrshire. CARES funding supporting our community organisations, business energy grants, net zero accelerator training for businesses, a whole range of school initiatives and awards and carbon literacy training within the Council. Climate change remains one of the Council's 6 themes of the strategic plan. With the £1 million accelerator fund coming to an end, the dedicated resource reducing, this will require a shift in what we are delivering while retaining the focus on carbon reduction measures. Paragraph 10 sets out the strategic themes and where services will continue to develop clear plans and drive the agenda forward. It's also proposed to integrate responsibilities and reporting further with the strategic plan, service plans, while retaining the oversight group to ensure continued joint working opportunities. The challenging national and financial position means there remains significant uncertainty with timescales for policy change and limited short-term funding. We also expect further review and changes on the reporting mechanisms at a national level, with the Environmental Standards Scotland and Climate Intelligence Service likely to introduce changes to reporting based on the new legislation. The wider implications are set out in the report, and would ask members to consider the recommendations on page 54, but happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. Graham.
Thanks, Dougie, and thanks for the report, Andrew. I think before I start, I think it's important to give credit to and thanks to James Lally, Natasha, Connor, Donna and Vicky for their contribution in driving forward the climate change strategy over the past 12 months. They are a truly inspirational team. It's an absolute pleasure to work with. So again, thank you to them. Andrew, it's another encouraging annual report that sees a further significant 29.4% reduction in our annual CO2 emissions. And that brings a total reduction of 65.6% since the baseline year 2012-13. Like yourself, I don't intend to go through the contents of the report. We've all read it. So there's clearly a discussion to be had in the recommendations 3 and 4, but I'd like to ask a few questions first before I can come back into it, if that's okay. So I've got a question. We've obviously made excellent progress in reducing our carbon footprint, Andrew, but there's clearly a recognition that energy consumption now contributes 85% of emissions, and that further large-scale reductions in our carbon footprint will require significant financial funding from external sources to improve the efficiency of our estate. With those financial implications in mind, what are the opportunities for the Council to mitigate its impact on the environment via the likes of carbon offsetting, such as large-scale tree planting on council land? And I'm not sure if you have this kind of detail at hand, Andrew, but what would it take to mitigate, if we had annual emissions of, say, 5,000 tonnes of carbon, what kind of mitigation level we would need there? I've got 2 further questions, if I'll just go through them all first. Electrical power usage, I mean, it obviously carries a much lower weighting due to the vast majority of the supply in Scotland come from renewable sources. See, if investment continues at this pace nationally, can we see a point in the future where the electrical supply will carry a 0 emissions rating? Weighting. And the final question is, we can see the fantastic work that's taking place in our ELC, primary schools and secondary schools. It's embedding climate change into the curriculum and encouraging behavioural change through initiatives like Power Down, Mission to Mars, Journey to Jupiter, Shoot to Saturn, Didn't Forget Your Carry, Lit in Schools, the Young People's Climate Change Conference, and the Clean Green Annual Awards. I think it's important to note that all these initiatives have been done in-house at a fraction of the cost that an external provider would do. Now, I know budgets are tight, but can I ask that we do everything we can to secure funding that would allow this excellent work within the Education Department to continue? So if I could just get answers to those questions, then I'll come back in again.
Thanks, yeah. Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Graham. I suppose maybe the first 2 points maybe are kind of connected to a certain extent. I think you're right. Energy is currently the challenge for us going forward, and that's obviously mainly around our buildings and probably split between electricity and gas. I'll maybe take the second part of that and then come on to the remaining bit. I think there is no doubt there's still a range of things we can do to reduce that carbon impact. Electricity use does feel that nationally it is moving towards the net zero approach. So with further wind farms and solar and other renewable sources of energy, that will reduce the weighting in terms of our electricity use. Nationally, the focus has been to try and move away from gas usage and move into electricity, because clearly there is no way of producing gas that doesn't have an impact on the environment. That's where a lot of the focus has been, looking at things like heat pumps and other sources of heat, and the national strategies about trying to move away from gas. Even within our own estate, there's a number of things there, like putting in biomass, putting in heat pumps has actually increased to a certain extent the electricity use while reducing the overall gas consumption. So I think there is that national element that will potentially reduce the overall carbon impact of electricity nationally. From the council's point of view, as I said, that they're clearly in the report, there's a number of things we can still do. Obviously, reducing our estate, looking at things like LED lighting, doing further audits into some of the detailed pieces of equipment that we've got that we can start to kind of replace it as low energy items. Again, will continue to kind of reduce that gap. But you're right, there is the chance that there is still going to be a gap, a residual amount of energy globally. Internationally, from the private sector, offsetting is already something that's already been established, where you can buy tree planting across the world, you can support initiatives elsewhere. I mean, clearly, as I've mentioned within the report, national environment is one of those areas that I think is still something that East Ayrshire has huge natural resources and would have further opportunities. Again, some of that links to some of the national policy stuff, and again, through planning, etc., there'll be a number of initiatives there that will need to be considered. But clearly that would remain still an opportunity to look at offsetting. I think in terms of the last point, clearly the funding that was provided and the activity of the team in particular has been setting up and creating a lot of the initiatives that you've mentioned. We have said sort of and continue to have some discussions about if there is other ways we can continue to develop and both kind of embedding these initiatives within schools, but also looking to kind of support where there's external funding or other methods to kind of continue to kind of develop some of these ideas, because as I say, they've really captured the imagination within schools and some real positive outcomes. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm aware that Linda's sitting with her hand up as well, so but I think myself and Councillor Reid and Councillor McMahon, we were up to the launch of the Shoot to Saturn at Partner Primary, and we were just blown away with the work that they had done in that school. We spoke to a young guy, Lewis, what a boy he is, and the passion that they showed in there, and I think it's embedding that long-term behavioural change is so important. But I'll sit and see what Linda's got to say in this.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, and Councillor Barton, thank you for your comments in that space. I think, first of all, I'd just like to come right beside you in regards to the whole piece about the success of the initiatives, and you've mentioned several of them, but the Power Down, Harriet Hedgehog, and moving along to our Clean Green awards, etc. So yeah, I would say that Andrew's absolutely right. We have it embedded in our strategic planning, but I do think, Councillor Barton, that clearly upon us as officers, potentially under member instruction, to think of other ways that we can seek to sustain the continuity of this type of approach, and indeed perhaps maybe think more as a council as to how we maybe expand this out into the adult community. So whilst our young people are really grasping a lot of these ideas, I suppose the idea is that we get to all of our residents in East Ayrshire, and perhaps that's where some sort of change to these types of initiatives can be gotten to enable that sustainability. So I really welcome your comments as to the work of the team in the space, and indeed to how embedded these programmes are in the school, that they're part of the furniture now in schools and ECCs, but the danger is, should they not stay as part of the furniture and they come and go and initiatives is all that they were, we're really keen for that not to happen. So it is in our strategic planning. However, I'd certainly welcome that challenge to look at what else we can do, because I do appreciate that the commentary, if we were to seek out this type of provision and input into the authority, this would come indeed at an incredibly significant cost to that which we currently pay to sustain the officers doing such great work. So I'm certainly happy to go back, if that's the challenge that's set down, Councillor Barton, to think about how we might innovate in the space around early intervention and take another look at that with fellow officers across the corporate management team.
Thanks, Linda. Graham, you want to come back on that? Oh, bring something else in.
No, I'd just like to thank Linda for that commitment to go and have a look at that. It's appreciate it.
Thanks. Elaine?
Thanks, Chair. I just really want to reinforce what Linda was saying there about efforts to continue this. We sometimes underestimate how difficult it is to do the behavioural change, but the team that James and the interns that have done really has impacted on behavioural change. If I just pick the "didn't forget your caddy" as an example, that had a direct impact on my own behaviour. And also I remember attending Hillhead Primary School Parent Council, and one of the parents came up to me at the end and said that their child had come home and was putting them under some real pressure to get a caddy because that household didn't have the food caddy. So that type of impact onto our adults, changing that behaviour, then actually impacts the priorities that we have as a council. So hats off to James and the team for all the work that they've done in this arena. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. No, I think it's been a very successful initiative, and I think it's going to be absolutely mainstreamed in everything we do. I think it's congratulations to Harness Pester, but that's a great achievement and underrated resources, every parent will say. But I think it's absolutely within everything that we do, and that behavioural change is going to happen right across the board, and whether it's education, whether it's housing, planning, fleet management, loads of things. Nearly everything that's on the table today under discussion as part of this has got some kind of climate change consequences. Even pavement parking as well has its consequences. But I think we're right in highlighting there the issues about the natural environment. I think there's a big challenge there, and it just coincides with places that we need to go as an authority. Whether it's the south and managing population decline and doing something about the former open cast sites gives us great opportunities, and we're already starting that and looking at the carbon capture to help, and we've got the core project and other things that are going on down there, and in the north. Looking at Kilmarnock, for example, the challenges we've got around about the flood risk, which is absolutely blighting significant parts of our community right across the south and central bits and some of the most economically active parts of the town. There's opportunities there to get some of this land back and negate some of the flooding issues and take a wee bit of pressure off some of the green space, which is constantly under pressure from developers. So I think we're absolutely right to highlight these 4 particular action points on pages 56 and 57. But I think that we need to keep, we understand that it's been an initiative, but we need to keep it's somewhere where we absolutely, it's right and proper for us to go, and we need to keep the pressure on, and it's not just seen as an add-on, and it's heartening to hear what Linda's got to say, because, when you go down and visit some of these schools and hear what our young people have got to say, it's, they convince us, we've got to protect their future. And very much education doesn't stop at youngsters. I think, as Graham and others have been saying there, the adults have got a lot to learn too. So I think, Graham, you mentioned you want to bring some recommendations if there's no one else.
Obviously, recommendations 3 and 4 are trying to shape the future direction of the strategy surrounding climate change. First and foremost, I want to say that climate change is and remains a top priority for the council. It has to. You just outlined, you've stole a bit of my thunder, and the impact that climate change is having in the west of Scotland. We've seen the flooding impacts. There's a whole swathe of the south central Kilmarnock we can't develop on. I think Andrew's told me in the past there's been at least 3 flooding that's exceeded the 1 in 200 SEPA criteria levels over the past 10 years. It's having an impact in the communities, and the council needs to show leadership in this space. And we set an ambitious target, reaching net zero by 2030. I recognise that this is going to be an extremely difficult, ambitious target to reach. And then I acknowledge the fact that it's going to take considerable external funding that would be required to get near that. So, I mean, I'm recommending that we maintain a very ambitious target for net zero for 2030, acknowledging that the financial impact. So I would like to amend recommendation 3 to read, maintain the Council's ambitious target of achieving net zero by 2030, whilst also recognising that this will be extremely difficult to achieve without a large injection of external funding. Also request that officers bring a further detailed report on the priorities listed in paragraph 10 that sets out the challenge, scale, opportunities and targets to continue to drive the net zero agenda. I'm just looking for some more meat about the bones that's round about the priorities and listed in paragraph 10. And in terms of a recommendation 4, I've got concerns that moving away from a standalone climate change team to a service-led strategy potentially could lead to a loss in focus. If we know our services are stretched, and I also want to kind of beef up the recommendation in there, Dougie, so that we ensure we keep that focus for a corporate level. So I want to amend recommendation 4 to agree the transition plan from the short-term climate change action plan funding to an integrated strategic plan approach is set out in paragraphs 101 to 107, while maintaining a strong corporate focus on carbon reduction, financial impact and responsiveness to emerging opportunities. And that's what I'd like to move that, the amendments to the recommendations.
I would support that. I'll second that. I'm just mentioning again the natural environment that came up with. There was a presentation at COSL last week from Scottish Water, and it's interesting to see where they've got less rainfall in places like Dundee and Edinburgh. That Scottish Water are very active just now, and looking at, there's a project called Water Resilient Dundee, which has got a fraction of the rainfall, but it suffers from the same post-industrial issues that we do in East Ayrshire. And I would hope that, as bringing reports part and looking at the natural environment, that we look to up the ante, so to speak, and reach out to SEPA and Scottish Water and them and various governments, both governments, to see what actually we can do to tackle some of the natural environments as a matter of priority within that. So certainly amongst the reports to be brought back, I would hope that there's a specific ask in terms of natural environment, and within that, I would gladly second that. Jim.
Thanks, and I'd be happy to go along with that as well. Just again, Andrew and James and the team as well, thanks very much for everything that user did it through that and through the education process. Just a thought come into my head as we work with local business to try and drive down more carbon emissions, and how things are weighted. And working with local businesses includes, through a planning department, the grant applications for wind farms. So I'm wondering, how do we weight the green energy that's produced for the wind farms and offset that against our own carbon emissions in East Ayrshire? Has it ever been weighted?
Through you, Chair. Maybe not go into detail about the wind farms, but you mentioned the open cast coal sites were obviously areas where we could support. There's work ongoing, as you probably recall, that most of the sites were taken over by Forestry Land Scotland. Each of those sites has a master plan, and that master plan is about soil remediation on each site, utilising companies such as Scottish Water, Thames Water, etc., to help those sites be more fertile. So there is a tree planting process in there that will look at capturing a huge significant amount of tree growth over the next decade. The challenge has been that it takes a number of years to get those sites in preparation. So that will have a significant positive impact on the carbon emissions and help to retain carbon within those areas. Unfortunately, it's just not an immediate offer. In terms of wind farms, we've obviously there's a kind of national that kind of feeds into the national policy in terms of obviously the overall figures rather than at a local level. But I don't know whether there's anything that we can further add to that.
I think from one of the points I was making earlier on is obviously from the council's carbon footprint, then you've got a measure of the area's carbon footprint. So within that area measure, there is consideration of some of these aspects, but the Climate Intelligence Service nationally have started to look at how some of that type of information has been reviewed and considered, because at the moment it's maybe not all connected up to an effective way. And as David says, where there's significant tree planting, where there's already significant energy production within East Ayrshire, those aren't necessarily filtering through to the figures that we're seeing within it. I don't know whether, James has been at a number of different meetings recently to kind of talk about that stuff, whether he can maybe give a wee bit of insight into the Climate Intelligence Service.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Andrew. Just there's a lot of work being going on nationally on this. The Climate Intelligence Service now have a piece of software called Climate View, which they are in the process of populating each area's carbon emissions. So we as a council will get a report on our carbon emissions, and that will be carried out annually. What the software also does is, and across Scotland, is allows councils to share best practice and actually look at initiatives across the 4 themes of our strategy that will actually reduce our area-wide emissions. And you're quite right, Councillor McMahon, in saying that we already offset a large amount of our carbon emissions in East Ayrshire through our tree planting, through our rural practices around agriculture and planting, so that's already recognised in that. In relation to the wind farms, I suppose the calculation there is not directly back to East Ayrshire's carbon footprint, but rather the emissions factor around emissions is reduced and continues to reduce around energy. And that was the point that Councillor Barton made about electricity emission factors should eventually be green once all, or be zero once all of our electricity is sourced from wind farms and other green sources. Hope that helps.
It does slightly. It does, but it still doesn't answer my question fully. Taking into consideration the amount of carbon emissions that are produced during the construction of the wind farms in East Ayrshire, surely that should be weighted again and against ours when we talk about energy and how the controllable and the cost of that. I'd have still thought the production as a local company that a wind farm would be weighted against our carbon offset to help us reduce our carbon emissions and meet that net zero target. But it's got to be weighted some way, and not just nationally, but locally as well.
Unfortunately, the current reporting arrangements don't allow for that. It is really the report as it stands at the moment is on the council's emissions. The wider national reporting is something that is under development. And I think if you speak to colleagues at Sustainable Scotland Network, they would admit that it's not an exact science. And I think even the way that carbon reporting within the council has evolved, I think we will see more onerous reporting arrangements on our own carbon emissions, and that will actually see our carbon footprint increase before we again start to decrease it. I think all carbon scientists would admit that it's not an exact science, but as long as we're heading in the right direction, as long as we know that we're doing the right things and changing that behaviour an area-wide basis, then I think that's where we get the recognition for that. And this new Climate View software will play an important part in actually showing us how much the initiatives that we are promoting are reducing our area-wide emissions.
Just on a kind of similar issue, but we're under a lot of pressure just now in terms of battery storage, and that's down in particularly the south of Cork, but I know that all round about Ayrshire that this seems to be an added pressure, and that's all part of, added to the wind farm money and storing some of this energy. But it seems kind of crazy to be locating that in some of our valuable green space. And moorland and stuff like that does so much to help flood prevention. Is there nothing we could really be doing and be speaking to government and trying to get these kind of businesses to locate to more to brownfield sites where they can actually bring something to rejuvenate some of the land rather than occupy themselves in some of our valuable green space and disturbing the natural environment? Something we could maybe look at. Just put it out there. I don't know, Karen or anybody else would like to comment on that.
Well, I think in terms of renewable energy developments, Chair, there's obviously a whole lot of constraints around like where they can happen because of the heights of things and the how they interact with other types of development. Obviously, the strategy in terms of the LDP is always to try and move people to brownfield sites before we're looking at greenfield sites. A lot of our land is obviously used up, and there isn't a kind of a huge range of big, massive brownfield sites that we can use. But it is always our strategy to try and do that.
I'll come in just.
I think it's something worth thinking about in future, because it's having quite considerable impact in the natural environment round about. And there's not, there's less and less that kind of space available in the periphery of our major towns and in the countryside.
David, through you, Chair. If you take the battery storage that's been installed in East Ayrshire Galton substation, that's next to the substation. So it's predominantly needs to be where the key apparatus is. So that's why it's there. It's the same way Kilmarnock South, and it's the same way the Kilmarnock in the central area down at Home Quarry Road. They're looking to put battery storage in there because that's where their key network is and the apparatus is. So that's what dictates it, rather than just picking a site. So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that ground round about, in the Rickerton area that is post-industrial space. It's actually blighted, and red-lined with SEPA. We'll not get into the details of that, but I think there's a kind of policy that we need to look at in future, because we're seeing more and more pressure for some of our key sites round about the town. We won't get into any detail. Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. Very encouraging and interesting conversations there. And obviously, in the interest of time, I don't want to keep things going. But key for me, the key imperative for this council, I think, as Councillor Barton has described, is keeping the focus on emerging opportunities. So that activity needs to continue. And as others, yourself and Andrew have explained, also scanning that horizon for best practices in other areas, such as the Dundee example you said. So I'm very supportive of the changes to recommendation 3 and 4 as outlined by Councillor Barton.
Thanks, Elaine. Rich, do you want to capture?
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Councillor Cowan's just stolen my thunder in terms of that last comment, because I think you're right. I think the conversation today has been really quite interesting and reflects the complexities, but also the opportunities in that sort of wider setting. And indeed, the Water Resilient Dundee example, already had conversations with the Chief Planning Officer around looking to see how we can embed that type of opportunity within that setting as well. Just wanted to, through you, Leader, thank members for the really positive comments on what's a really positive report and recognise the great work that's happened thus far. And really just picking up on Councillor Barton's comments and proposed amendments to the recommendation, from a corporate perspective, I wanted to reaffirm that, we remain absolutely committed to this agenda. and we'll continue to work towards our ambitions, within the cash limit available budget we've got. And that's why it's so important that we absolutely do maximise the opportunities for any external funding that's available to invest in the climate change agenda, and obviously report back to members in that regard as and when we secure that funding. And certainly in terms of recommendation 3, recognising this would be achieved with that external funding, I'd be more than happy to absolutely reaffirm and give that corporate support in terms of the recommendations as presented, Leader, through you.
Thanks, Rich. That's certainly very helpful. And I'd just like to repeat, just thank the group for all their hard work in getting us thus far. But there's a long journey to go and challenges ahead. So we need to be absolutely prepared for that. And it's part of root and branch of what we do as a council. And it must be absolutely embedded there, as you say, Rich. Okay, can we agree the recommendations as amended by Councillor Barton? Okay. Thanks for that. And going to our next item. That's the end of our E items, and allow the education spokespersons to leave at this stage. Yeah. Right. Okay, on to item 7. Seamlessly into local heat and energy efficiency strategy and Ayrshire Energy Master Plan update. Karen.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to present Cabinet with the Local Heat and Energy Efficiency Strategy, or LHES, and seek approval to publish the strategy to enable the Council to meet its statutory obligations. This report also provides a progress update on the creation of the Ayrshire Energy Master Plan. Paragraphs 3 to 5 set out the background in terms of the LHES Scotland Order 2022 and that the LHES supports ambitious targets for energy efficiency and carbon reduction as published in the Scottish Government Heat and Buildings Strategy, notably to reach net zero by 2045. Paragraphs 7 to 8 set out the strategic context of the Ayrshire Energy Master Plan, in which members will recall East Ayrshire Council partnered with North and South Ayrshire Councils, Scottish Enterprise and the University of the West of Scotland to progress this through external consultants. Jumping briefly to paragraphs 11 to 13, the most recent update to Cabinet in January 2023 confirmed the appointment of a lead consultant and that work on the Ayrshire Energy Master Plan was due to commence, including the establishment of a short-term subgroup of the Clean Growth Workstream as part of the Regional Economic Strategy. So since then, work has progressed and we're now in possession of a final draft of the Master Plan, which will be subject to finalisation between partners and then taken to the Regional Economic Partnership. We'll then present it to Cabinet in a future report. The report does set out the timescales for delivery for that have extended way beyond those originally anticipated due to practical difficulties upon commencement of the project. So the LHES doesn't set out to conflict with or duplicate the Ayrshire Energy Master Plan, rather it takes us the heating and energy efficiency of buildings as a consideration of the Master Plan and develops it to a more detailed level for intervention. And paragraphs 9 to 10 update the context of the preparation of the LHES since the paper was last brought to Cabinet on this matter. Paragraphs 14 to 23 provide a summary of the LHES strategy and the document and details on the initial delivery plan. That will align with the current capital investment programme, the local housing strategy and the property management plan, whilst recognising the current financial pressure on council budgets. The LHES will be embedded in future capital investment programme discussions and the delivery plan is expected to be updated regularly to reflect project and funding changes. We do expect the delivery plan to be developed in more detail with an update probably on that next year. Paragraphs 24 to 26 set out the consultation and engagement undertaken to date and the plans for further public consultation. The project challenges are set out in paragraphs 31 to 33 and as Andrew's talked about in terms of climate change, the scope of what local authorities are being asked to deliver through the LHES is substantial. In recognition of this scale, the LHES aims to identify where initial measures will have the greatest impact on making homes and public buildings easier to heat. However, the Council's ability to deliver LHES at scale will be constrained by internal resource limitations, as will indeed be the case for all local authorities. The next steps are set out in paragraphs 34 to 36. Following consultation, we'll enter the delivery phase, and these paragraphs set out the expected requirement for a governance and reporting structure. The implications are set out in paragraphs 37 to 48. Just briefly in terms of the financial implications, there is no dedicated funding for the implementation of the LHEs other than a Scottish Government commitment of £75,000 a year until 2028, the majority of which is used for a staff resource to lead on this. External funding for specific projects will be pursued on a per opportunity basis, and we will seek to maximise the benefits available through current work streams such as the Community Renewable Energy Programme. The recommendations are set out in paragraph 2, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I've got Andrew Brockett here, who's our LHE's officer, and obviously David. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Any questions? Just one of the interesting features of the report is, for me is in terms of, you can see geographically and through what you're saying about the private sector. Seems to be the private sector some of the worst incidences of fuel poverty in the area. I can see certainly around about Moonway and Kilmarnock, it's quite marked that it is the private sector rather than kind of smaller owned homes as well, the owner occupied sector as well. So that's a big challenge for us, but it speaks volumes of what we're able to do in terms of a housing authority. But we need to encourage to go far to encourage the private sector to do likewise. So that's maybe something for the future. Anybody else any comments or observations? Graham?
Can I make a quick comment? When I read the project challenges there, it brings it really home, the size and scale and the financial commitment that we needed, especially for private homeowners. I mean, I do welcome it. My home's drafty, and I would welcome the fact that they're going to identify initial measures to try and improve your home, because I don't know what steps to do next which would improve my home. I think that is encouraging to see. But again, I welcome the report and happy to approve the recommendations. Okay,
thanks. If there's nobody other comments, I'll second the recommendation. Is there any otherwise minded? No, we agree therefore. Okay, thanks for that report, much appreciated. And you're on again, Coalfield Communities Landscape Partnership Project update.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and keep this as succinct as I can. Obviously, it's quite a kind of complicated report with a lot of detail in it. So the purpose of this is to update Cabinet on the progress of the Coalfield Communities Landscape Partnership. The report seeks approval for the extension of the project and associated staffing arrangements to ensure the project delivers its key outputs and outcomes, and further to agree the reprofiling of the funding allocation to maximise the impact of the CCLP. Paragraphs 3 to 6 set out the background to it, with delivery originally anticipated to end in August 2025 and staff contracts in March 25, and you can see why that is in the report. In paragraphs 7 to 8 provide progress updates on the 22 projects being delivered, and 9 to 14 the details of and the rationale for a proposed extension to the scheme. There are 7 projects as detailed in the table beneath paragraph 9, which are not expected to complete prior to the end of August 2025. So there are a few of these, so attainment through archaeology, coalfields to wildwoods, and the landscape apprentices, which are fairly straightforward and have no known obstacles to completion other than requiring a slight extension to the time to deliver these. The Doon Valley biking has incurred substantial delays due to a project redesign and the planning application requiring to be resubmitted, but has secured all funding and is now on track for delivery by August 2025. Similarly, parts of the Lugar Valley Walk have been delayed due to difficulties in obtaining landowner agreement, but this project is ready to start on site at the beginning of January and will complete by August. You'll appreciate there's a lot of work that goes into trying to get these projects off the ground, and partly that's why they take so long to actually get into delivery, but once we get there, things obviously progress. There are 2 projects where there is a lesser degree of confidence around delivery. So that's the Doon Valley Walk, which is subject to funding from Transport Scotland, and it's currently unclear if this will be forthcoming as we await news from them. I have made an application, but like many government funding streams, the results of that have been delayed. The final project is the Doon Valley Railway. Slow progress has been made on that due to capacity issues within the group, the ARPG, who lead on that. There does remain a funding gap of almost £57,000 on this project, but there are sufficient funds to progress with a new shed, which will be the main element of the project, subject to them achieving planning permission, which they're in for at the moment. If funding is not achieved by April 2025, the restoration of the existing wagon shed, which they wanted to achieve as part of this project, won't be able to complete. The projects have been reviewed in a lot of detail, and with the exception of the Doon Valley Walk, which is obviously dependent on external funding, progress should be able to be made to ensure drawdown of the national NHLF grant. Further detailed dialogue will take place with all of the project partners to set out end dates for delivery and end dates for achievement of milestones towards delivery, including securing of external funds where applicable. And in order to minimise the risk of not drawing down a large amount of the grant, we are seeking an extension to the scheme to the 31st of December 25, which should enable grant funding to be maximised. We talk in the report about how, based on past experience, there is a lot of work that's required at the end of the delivery phase to just conclude matters in terms of finances, evaluation and monitoring, and legacy, which we're required to do as part of our grant, and that the NLHF will withhold money until they're satisfied that we have completed the scheme. Paragraphs 15 to 17 set out the proposed staffing arrangements to accommodate an extension to the scheme. So at present, we've got 3 posts associated with the CCLP. A project supervisor, a full-time project officer and a part-time project officer. So that part-time post became vacant earlier this year and we don't plan to fill it. The remaining staff contracts end on the 31st of March next year, and if we are to complete the remaining projects, we do require an extension of the project supervisor post until the end of next year to assist with delivery. And you can see the costs in there for that, an additional £43,464. Paragraphs 16 and 17 set out that the full-time project officer does not require to be extended and the associated costs of redundancy should redeployment options not prove successful for the individual in that post. Finally, paragraph 18 sets out the proposed project reprofiling to ensure maximum grant drawdown, and this is set out in detail in Appendix 5. There are a range of implications in paragraphs 19 to 30, and in particular, I just want to draw out the financial implications in paragraph 25, which set out that the proposals will require an additional £41,145 to be allocated from the Restoring Communities programme in the financial year 25-26. That will allow us to draw down the full NLHF grant, as well as to achieve the outputs that we set out at the start of the CCLP. Paragraph 26, just in terms of a bit of reassurance that financial controls are in place so that monies will not be drawn down until spend has been incurred. And we will advise them in writing of project end dates and notify them that financial contributions will not be forthcoming beyond the life of the scheme. The recommendations are set out in paragraph 2, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Karen. Colleagues, Jim?
Thanks, Dougie. Thanks, Karen, for the favour. As I sit on the Coalfield Community Landscape Partnership Board, and on behalf of the council, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting on that. And I can pay tribute to the staff, each and every one of them, for the hard work and the volunteers all the way out through the scheme. COVID has played a major part in the delivery of that, is set out in the paper, and the timescales run about that and the reasons why it's running over. But just to mention a couple of the projects that's been there, the Lugar Heritage Church, it's an absolutely fantastic place. If you hadn't been at that, please pay it a visit. The project that was done about the Lost Villages and the oral history at the Baird was absolutely fantastic, and again that went up into Edinburgh, and it's been absolutely delightful, and I took part in that myself. One project for me that I really think is worthy of note is the Askin Railway Heritage Trust. My vision for that, would love to see that extended. I think I've had that conversation right across the south, the Doon Valley, and right across into Newcomer. I think there's fantastic opportunities for tourism there. It's just getting the encouragement and the funding to deliver that. Some of the paths and the roadways are already there, as we've discussed in the past, but I think it's one to cherish and one to push forward as well. So yeah, it's been great. It's been fantastic. Some of the walkways up through the Lugar, the River Lugar and through Ochiltree. Some challenges that it posed during the time, obviously with the high rivers and busting their banks and taking away bridges. But again, it's been reinstate it. So it's been a pleasure working through that. And also my involvement with the Coalfield Environmental Initiative and some of the pollinator projects and the peatland restoration really worked well with some of that funding through for the Coalfield Regeneration Committee. And also it would be remiss of me not to mention the trust and the musical that took place through there with the schools and everything. Fantastic.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, some excellent work going on down there. Maybe when the better weather comes in, worth a wee visit, if we can do that. Colleagues, any other comments? Okay, can I refer to recommendations? Can we agree recommendations on page 284? Okay, thanks. And now go to item 9, which is Ayrshire Roads Alliance update on electrical vehicle charging tariff. Is it Jane or Laura? Who's Laura?
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the paper is to provide an update on the EV charging tariff. So recommendations 1 and 3 are for noting under the delegated authority of the head of Ayrshire Roads Alliance, and we're seeking approval for recommendation 2. Background to the paper is noted within paragraphs 3 through 6 with reference to the current charges that were implemented on the 1st of April 2024. Feedback that's been noted from the drivers since the implementation from the tariff is noted within paragraphs 7 through 9. The main challenges with the overstay fees are noted at paragraph 10, which notes that since the implementation there has been no way of applying the overstay fee previously agreed due to the new CPS back office system not allowing the exemption times. Analysis of the other 29 local authority tariffs on overstay is noted at paragraph 11, where only 3 local authorities have no overstay fees on their 50 kilowatt chargers, with the other 26 local authorities applying overstay charges at all times with no exemptions on their 50 kilowatt chargers. And applying the proposed overstay charge within recommendation 2, with no exemption on our own rapid chargers, this will align us with the other 26 local authorities. The increase in the current tariff is detailed within paragraphs 14 through 20, with paragraph 14 noting that the council aims to move to a concession contract in 2025-2026, where an appointed charge point operator will take over the risk and have control of the tariffs moving forward. However, at this point, it was worth noting that the council will ensure provisions within the contract that there will be a maximum cap on the tariffs with checks and balances in place. Should the charge point operator wish to reduce the tariffs, they can do so. They can do this at any point in the contract. Table 1 notes the comparison of other local authorities' electric vehicle charging tariffs, where the average costs at September 2024 were 45 pence for the 7 and 22 kilowatts and 61 pence for the 50 kilowatt chargers. Table 2 then notes the increases in the tariffs to bring these in line with the other local authorities, without a phased approach, with the initial increase on the 1st of January and then again on the 1st of July 2025. This will align the tariff with the financial model that was provided as part of the successful application to Transport Scotland for the £2.8 million of the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund across the 3 Ayrshires. The proposed increases will be slightly higher than the average across the other local authorities. However, it still remains lower than the market-based average of the price index of September 2024. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much for that, Laura. Just maybe make a point, support the paper in general, but I think there was the last time we introduced I think folk with electrical vehicles, in particular people with no access to electricity contact in their own home, were doubly affected by charging for parking and charging for the electricity at the same time. And I've noticed and I think quite a number of people have approached me and said that there's been a marked fall in the amount of people using the chargers during the day. And I know that this is, it would appear that certainly as far as Ayrshire and South West Scotland are concerned, I've known even further that Kilmarnock seems to be the only town where we charge for parking and electricity. So, I think, we've spent a lot of money putting this infrastructure in. I think it's perhaps, looking back in retrospect, where the ambition was to prevent people abusing, using the parking bays while not actually connecting to the chargers, just to get some free parking. Well, we should continue to look to ways where we can discourage that. I think we need to maybe reconsider charging for parking, because it's certainly something we don't want Kilmarnock to discourage people from using Kilmarnock. But with the double whammy, not just only paying for electricity, particularly as the charges have increased, but paying for parking as well. So I would hopefully look to see if we can look to maybe changing that as we bring in these new charging levels. But other than that, I would broadly support the way forward. Jim.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree with picking touch on that one first round about the Kilmarnock issue. And the reason we brought it in was that we would suspect, I think, that there could be potentially abuse in that system where just plugging your car in and no charging and getting free parking for the day. However, taking into consideration what the Leader has said, I think we maybe have another look at that. And then if we can remove that parking charge, and no the EV charge, obviously, but the parking charge, and monitor that to see if it has been abused. And then if it has been abused, then potentially we could bring it back. But I think, and I would agree with the Leader on this one, that we could remove that parking charge, no the EV charge. And if it has been abused after being monitored, then potentially we could bring it in. We introduced it on the assumption it would be abused. I think maybe we need to establish that, whether it is now, taking into consideration Kilmarnock would be the only place that is paying for the parking and charging. But if we could just cover some other points in the paper. It's with reluctance that I do accept this, given the public investment in this over the last number of 8 years and go to the level that we are. But I fully understand for that to go forward and to capture the Scottish Government's investment into the private sector is going to come into this. I've often been asked in East Ayrshire what we benefit for the wind turbines, and that was one area I could point to that we had probably the cheapest tariff in Scotland at that time, being 31 and 37. However, that needs to change with that concession contract. And having a look at that concession contract, obviously the length of time that's set out for us to have a look at that, possibly to pull it back in, maybe at one stage back to the council. I'm aware that it needs that length of time for the investment in the renewing of the infrastructure that's there. The overstay charges, I'm okay with that. But what I do need is a bit of PR, really put out there around about dropouts. I know for past experience myself that potentially I could connect 3 times and it drop out 3 times. That's 3 £5 charges and a space of a minute. If you do that, if you just correct a bit of your charge. I'm also aware recently Charge Place Scotland charging individuals 80 pence in East Ayrshire. £1 owed in East Ayrshire up to charges well below the £5 tariff, and dates back on the charging structure as far back as 2000 on the invoice. So I'm aware of a couple of them, and 29 of them coming in one go. So it's something, and I know they've taken it up with Charge Place Scotland, but they've not had a response back, right, on that issue, because you're dealing with customer service operators and it needs to go to the back room. So that's really important that we cover dropouts, that we're really emphasised to people that they need to raise that issue with Charge Place Scotland straight away. I think I pretty well covered it as far as that charging goes, but they are notes of concern for me on it.
I would back up what Jim's saying in terms of Charge Place Scotland, where there needs to be, some a wee bit of action, and that's where you put your car in the charger and it stops charging inexcusably for whatever reason after a short period of time, and you're hit with that double charge. You're hit with a £5 every time, even though it's only been charging for 10 minutes because the machine isn't working properly. And I'm aware of quite a number of cases where that's happened. and just basically for Charles Place Scotland to make sure that the machines are kept in action. I was in Stuart myself the other week, and there was 4 the charging machines that were not working in one Saturday afternoon, and I was nearly stranded in Stuart in one afternoon. No, that's a major issue, but managed to. It is important that particularly in rural areas, that the machinery is kept functioning for the sake of, to encourage people again to use electrical vehicles while they can. But just so back up, just agree with what Jim was saying there. Anyone else? Rich, aye.
Thanks, Leader. Just given the conversation earlier today, members and the commitment to climate change and encouragement and use of electric vehicles, I'm sure that the proposal before us is something that we can accommodate, but just wanted to just double check through Laura and or Joe that my assumption is the financial impact is minimal. The implications can be managed within the ARA cash limit revenue budget, but just to confirm that to keep us all safe, Leader.
And through you, Chair, yes, looking at Laura too, so yes, that could be contained within the existing resource.
Okay. So I would second Jim's amendment, that additional about the parking fee.
I think Councillor McMahon seconded you, Chair. Yes.
I was just changing your way, David. You're ever. Right, so James, you want to come in there? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify regarding the charge for parking on the EV bays. So Barry has been in discussions with Kilmarnock Business Association about a few changes that they have suggested to the parking charges, like introducing a 15-minute increment on the on-street parking and so on. And we are proposing to review that and bring that back as another paper that we could incorporate the deletion of the charges on the EV bays at that stage. Or are you suggesting, and has it been agreed that that is going to be done now? I'm just a point of clarity.
I believe you've been asked to remove the parking charge for the EV bays as of now and to keep it under review. And if there should be any problems, to bring that back and we'll deal with it again then.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Sorry, Claire.
It's just a quick question. It was after the briefing we got, which thank you very much, very helpful. Is there going to be a new generation of parking smarter chargers, because these don't seem to be very intelligent in the digital age? We can't seem to get as much information out of them, and they're prone to breakdown. For example, we were asking, can we tell when a charger's finished, and then we'd know they'd overstayed their welcome in a car park bay? Thank you.
Laura, I thought you could in some instances, but I don't know if that's consistent right across a bit.
It's not consistent, Chair. So what we are doing as part of the next paper that's coming up, part of that we'll be looking at the digital innovation, the changes to the chargers. So we will be expecting that new charge place operator that's coming in to be looking at replacing the older chargers, and then an ongoing rolling programme to replace them with more smart chargers as we go.
I think that would help give people more confidence in going to the chargers and not getting stranded in Stewarton. Thank you.
Thanks for that helpful advice. Okay, can we agree? You agree the recommendations as suggested, as amended by Jim, or myself rather. That's a long day, a lot of papers this morning. Right, back to Laura and Jane with item 10.
Thank you, Chair. So, purpose of the report is to provide an update on the progress of ARA's collaboration with North Ayrshire Council regarding the electric vehicle infrastructure strategy, with a focus on the current procurement phase. The recommendations for noting are within paragraph 3. Background on the previous paper that was approved is within paragraph 4 through 8. This makes reference to the Cabinet's approval of the initial paper in March 2023, where it was agreed that Model B was the preferred option. This model was where all of the capital investment, excluding the grant funding elements, including future investments in maintenance, repair and back office, would be the responsibility of the commercial sector for the duration of the contract, and therefore there would be no financial impact on the council. Paragraph 8 notes that there are previously approved concession contract is expected to be a duration of 20 years. On expiry of that contract, it is anticipated that we would then procure an additional procurement concession contract. Progress so far is noted within paragraphs 9 and 10. Paragraphs 11 and 12 note the market engagement through the PIN issued by procurement, and also the appointment of Mott MacDonald as consultants to this phase. Second phase of procurement on the tender preparation is noted at paragraph 13, with an anticipated issue date of December, January time. However, this is with bids being submitted by mid-May 2025. Funding and partnerships for the project are also noted in paragraphs 14 through 20, with the next steps noted through paragraphs 21 through 23, which notes that the anticipated award date is around July 2025, with the contract commencing in August, September time of 2025. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Jim?
No, just for comment again, Dougie. As I said earlier on there, as part of that contract, it's expected to be for a duration of 20 years. I do note once the concession contract ends, it's expected that we'd procure another concession contract, and there'll be a requirement to replace the existing EBIs. So that 20-year, I think we can note it in the diary. I know I don't think I'll be running about here to remind you about it, but it's worth taking note of it.
Because it was your birthday the other day there, Jim, you're not fucking... You never know, you never know. Colleagues, any comments? Can we agree with the report? Okay, thanks. And we now go to another roads issue. And Jane or Barry, I don't know who's Barry. You help for this one. Pavement parking enforcement exemptions.
Thanks, Chair. This report provides an update to Cabinet on the road assessments that have been undertaken relating to new pavement parking prohibitions, and it provides an update on the work undertaken to progress the implementation plan. The report also seeks approval for the preparation and promotion of an exemption order, which should apply exemptions to certain streets which have met the relevant criteria, as well as orders associated with waiting restrictions. At its meeting held on the 17th of January 2024, Cabinet agreed to approve the proposal to commence work towards implementing pavement parking enforcement, and to note the intention to present a future report relating to the results of a street assessment process. As explained in paragraph 6, in addition to prescribed exemptions, the Act allows for the promotion of exemption orders applying strict criteria. Consideration can be given to exempt a street or parts of a street if the pavement is of sufficient width to allow 1.5 metres to remain unobstructed when any part of a vehicle is parked on it, or the width of the carriageway associated with the pavement is such that any vehicle parked on it would obstruct any emergency vehicle. With reference to paragraph 8, the assessment process began with a desktop exercise which helped identify streets which required day and night inspections to establish if exemptions should be considered. Feedback was also gathered through a dedicated email account and social media accounts, and members were also encouraged to make suggestions following a briefing note issued in March. In the majority of locations where pavement parking was observed, where road widths did not fall below 4 metres, any further consideration into whether exemptions should apply was ruled out. At these locations, the conclusion was that in moving vehicles onto the carriageway, streets would still be passable with care, and it would not be appropriate for the authority to intervene at this time.
So as a result of this robust approach, we were able to whittle down the amount of streets requiring exemptions to 4. However, as explained at paragraph 11, in addition to these streets, we have also put forward proposals to apply exemptions to further 19 streets located within the northwest area of Kilmarnock and footways which have been purposely converted to allow for off-street parking. And there is also a need to introduce weighting restrictions in support of the payment parking ban, including the main arterial route, Irvine Road, Kilmarnock, which does not meet the exemption criteria, but where moving parked vehicles onto the carriageway would create traffic congestion. A full list of the proposed exemptions is listed at Appendix 1. Proposed associated weighting restrictions are listed at Appendix 2, and there are supporting plans included at Appendix 3. In terms of implementation, the report also describes the background work undertaken to date to ensure we are ready to commence enforcement. As things stand, whilst the order-making process is unlikely to be completed until September 2025, the commencement of enforcement procedures will be achieved by April 2025. Members are also asked to note that the effects of payment parking enforcement will be monitored to establish what effect that might have on parking behaviour, and further action may be taken to introduce further exemptions or restrictions should the need arise. We will also publish an enforcement policy which will set out our approach to enforcement and how we will prioritise the work and how we will deal with any complaints received. There are 6 recommendations as set out at paragraph 3, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah. Okay, open this up to colleagues. Elaine.
Thanks, Chair. When we received the report back in January this year, Chair, my understanding was the approach that we approved was that there would be the desktop exercise, a traffic light assessment session, and there would be further engagement with elected members based on the outcome of that assessment. I personally did promote the assessment session. I did a councillor newsletter in my ward, which was all hand delivered to bring this to people's attention. I also signposted a particular resident, one gentleman who had real concerns about House Street, and I put him in direct contact with ARA. But I feel there's been a step missed here where after doing that assessment process, we were looking to introduce the weighting restrictions. There hasn't been an opportunity to have further dialogue until this paper in front of us today was produced. So I'm looking for opportunities of how we can polish today's recommendations so we can look at some of the streets that have got restrictions and have that opportunity for dialogue with local members to have that knowledge input, both to understand the rationale of where the restrictions are coming in and also any unintended consequences that they might bring, that maybe officers aren't aware of what the local residents in that area would be thinking about. And part and parcel of that whole process would be the whole communication with residents, so it doesn't come to them as a shock, because I know in the council we'll be living in our bubble that this legislation has been passed by the Scottish Government and it's been handed to the council to implement it. But I think any work we can do to actually work with the residents to make it as a smooth introduction as possible would be welcomed. So I'm looking for opportunities of how I can look at some of the technical rationale, particularly on 75% of the streets that have been highlighted for the weighting restrictions. Thank you.
Excellent. Barry.
Chair, there's only 4 streets where the recommendation is to introduce weighting restrictions by introducing double yellow lines. That's 3 of those streets are contained within cul-de-sacs in the northwest area of Kilmarnock. These are the streets where the carriageway did fall below the 4 metre width. So in order to support payment parking ban, we're recommending that one side of the street will receive a partial exemption, which will allow cars to park half on and half off the footway, and the other side of the street would be subject to the weighting restrictions, and that's purely to preserve the safe passage of emergency vehicles up and down the cul-de-sacs. And then the 4th location, as I highlighted, was in Irvine Road, Kilmarnock, where we feel that
if we don't proceed with the restrictions, we're going to create some serious congestion as a result of queuing traffic for the traffic lights at Monroe Avenue. That's hopefully that helps.
Thanks. Anyone else? Elaine or Jim?
It doesn't really help me with the rationale. I understand what they're trying to do here, but it's the unintended consequences that's going to happen in those areas. And I think I personally would benefit from a site visit to talk through at least 2 out of the 4 streets that are the cul-de-sacs. One of the streets, I do think there is an issue with access for emergency vehicles. However, the papers in front of us, the side of the street that the yellow lines are highlighted on is actually the side of the street that most of the cars park on at the moment. So that was the kind of level of detail I wasn't wanting to get into in chambers today, but I feel that there's been that missed opportunity to engage with local members on how we've ended up with the recommendations that are going to impact on our constituents.
Excellent. David?
Chair, as those present have heard, what's been suggested is there has not been a reasonable level of consultation with local members, and these proposals conform to the previous decision, which I don't have in front of me in terms of that previous minute, but accepting that was built in at the time, then the 2 matters for Cabinet just now are, 1, understanding whether or not that consultation and engagement in any form took place with local members to inform this paper, and if not, it's understanding what the implications would be if, as Councillor Cowan put it, this was now paused to allow that engagement to take place. As a starter for 10, my reading of the paper is that there is no specific statutory timescale that we're working to, and if I've read that wrong, colleagues will come in a wee minute, but we are saying we're aiming for September, but with a starting point in April. The impression from the paper, and we'll look for colleagues to confirm, would be that we have flexibility on the timescale. So if it can be accommodated, it's a matter for Cabinet whether you then want to pause it as requested and allow for that consultation with information that we'll now seek as to what the impact would be in terms of the statutory process. So in short, the question is what would be the impact of any pause to allow a round of local member engagement, both on the proposals that are there and by extension the logic behind the proposals that aren't there in terms of any additional exemptions, etc., etc. So as Councillor Cowan said, rather than Cabinet get into that level of detail here with just a number of members, it would perhaps be appropriate to continue to allow a session to be set up to have those conversations. But the question for Cabinet is what's the impact on the overall deliverable timescale for the project in terms of the statutory context. So can we accommodate it?
I think there's a balance there in terms of, we know that this will help safety issues and all the rest of it, but we want to get it right. And, you know, we don't want to lose the whole initiative. If the members feel they can't support it because there's not been enough consultation, I think it's fair to accept that request and continue it for a period of time. I'm open to suggestions. Jim, sorry, you want to come in.
I think maybe if I could bring, if you don't mind, Chair, I could bring Barry back in just on what the overall deliverable impact on the timescale would be with the extension of timescale before I come back in and say.
So the commencement enforcement isn't dependent on having the exemption orders or any weight restrictions put in place. We could still proceed with taking up the powers and commencing enforcement in April 2025. And obviously bear in mind that there will be streets that are subject to further consideration, and we'll just, we'll stay away from those streets until there's a settled position.
So on that deliverable impact to the full act, there is scope beyond that as well, but the dates that's in the paper, April.
Yeah, we would just push back the order making process. We might not be able to hit September, but that doesn't affect that if there's agreement, that wouldn't affect our ability to start enforcement in April, when we concentrate on the streets that we know warrant some action.
Okay, so just back to what's a kind of reasonable period couple of months or something like that, or it's like, what do you think, Sir Reno? What would you be suggesting?
I'm happy to fit in with any timescale that's suitable to Tara. My one ask would be for a site visit to look at the at least three out of the 4 streets, the 2 cul-de-sacs and the Ayrshire Drive. But I'm flexible as much as possible.
I mean, don't want to put too much pressure on folk. 2 or 3 months, I'm thinking, I don't know. Jim?
So I was going to suggest bringing it back in 3 months. Bring it back in 3 months to us. Let's not forget at the very core of this is run about pedestrian safety and not so much about parking on the pavements and that breach of that law. It's delivering again as we have done in our papers and looking back in active travel when you're walking. It's about safe active travel. Let me just emphasise that again. So it's run about safe active travel for the people out there yet using our pavements, but I'd be content to move that we bring it back in 3 months.
Okay, can we agree that support the paper and its recommendations about to come back? Sorry, Neil?
Just see that Ian has his hand up online.
Ian, all right, I didn't see. Thanks, Neil. Ian?
Thanks for that, Dougie, and thank you, Neil, for flagging that up. Yeah, I would certainly like to be consulted with regards to the Irvine Road. I know the area well, having stayed just round the corner for the last 26 years or something like that. And I know there's a number of houses that have very steep front gardens, and I'm a bit concerned about that. So certainly would be pleased to be included in any discussions with regards to the Irvine Road in much the same way as Elaine would.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, I'll move that then that we continue in terms of consultation on those details, but support the rest of the recommendations. Okay. Now go to item 12. Food law. Oh, right, sorry. Food law service plan, including food law recovery project objectives. Elaine.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, or good afternoon, members. As we've just gone past midday. This is our food law service plan. It incorporates the food law recovery project objectives. It's year 4 of the 5-year recovery plan, and we've previously brought papers to Cabinet in 21, 22 and 23. This is a review of our year 3 and our plan for year 4. And Morag McCallum is going to take you through the detail of the plan.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The food law or the food safety service plan is written in accordance with the Food Law Code of Practice and the Food Standards Scotland Food Law Recovery Project, which commenced in September 21. We're now in year 4, as Elaine said, of the Food Law Recovery Plan, which was put in place following the COVID pandemic, when all planned food inspections were paused in line with the COVID restrictions. This inevitably led to a backlog, which we continue to deal with today. The food law activities cover more than planned inspections. They include handling complaints, investigating infectious disease, sampling food and water, responding to food alerts and food incidents, consulting on planning and licensing applications, among many other things that the department deals with. Additionally, the team have a responsibility for health and safety enforcement also. The plan outlines the type of businesses inspected in year 3 and what was achieved within the resource available. It was known that there was a deficit of 2 officers in relation to the establishment. This was known through a resource calculation that was undertaken in 2021 at the beginning of the Food Law Recovery Project. As you can see, the plan for 24-25 details the known number of planned interventions, and we knew that this number would be high. Years 2 and 4 were predicted to be high. However, we have to include also the ongoing backlog to this figure. Additionally, we have figures that we have, the plan doesn't show figures that are unknown to us, interventions that will be included throughout the year, which will arise from new business inspections and complaints. That said, our focus has always been on high-risk businesses, those considered to present the greatest risk to the consumer, whether due to the type of process undertaken or the level of compliance that they pose. We have strived to fill vacant posts and been successful in doing so, in particular the latter part of this year, and successfully trained and assisted student EHOs to gain the professional qualification, and most importantly, remain working within the department thereafter. In conclusion, it isn't just an East Ayrshire issue, it's a nationwide issue in terms of backlogs of interventions and staff vacancies and shortages within the profession, and this is recognised by Food Standards Scotland and our professional body. I'd like to thank you for listening and reviewing the plan, and I'm happy to take comments. However, just as a point to note that we've recently been notified from Food Standards Scotland that they plan to undertake an audit of our department in terms of our official controls verification of our approved establishment over a 3-week period in January. And they've initially requested a number of documentations in relation to those interventions, which will be providing to them before the Christmas break. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks very much. Know how busy you've been. The number of premises that seem to keep growing, and new practice and delivering and stuff like that, and to make sure we're all safe and the businesses can continue to operate. Colleagues, any comments or questions? Jim?
No, just again, the pressures that the service has been under, and to recognise that and to deliver that is a fantastic achievement. We see that there's 136 registered food premises and 12 approved. They might have lovely shiny lights and smashing places, but you never know what goes on behind the scenes, behind the doors in the kitchen. So it's encouraging to hear that we're getting there, and also recognises the impact that being able to staff their positions and the impact it's having not just locally but wider nationally. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much. I'm just interested in the paragraph about fishing vessel inspection. You can turn your hand to anything, but I understand why you've got to do that in our landlocked authority. Just thanks for the work you do, and know the pressure that you're under, and unless there's any further questions. Oh, Graham, you want in? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I was going to pass on my thanks, but yourself and Jim have already covered that. But obviously you're working in difficult circumstances, and just to thank the team, and it's good to see that we're growing our own talent locally, so thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, can we agree the recommendations? Okay, thanks, and thanks for your thanks for the paper. Now going to exclusion of press and public, and ask IT colleagues to stop the recording for minutes.